Tell you what, it makes me a little jealous. I was youth pastor for 11 years, and I think I remember a time where I didn't want to do anything else in my life ever except be a youth pastor because I got to be a glorified teenager at 20. Now I'm in my 30s, and really, let's be honest, I still am, but I have the privilege of serving as a lead pastor here at Illumination Church. We are so blessed with our youth pastor, Jason Reynolds, and his wife, Krista. They've done an outstanding, amazing job. For those of you who don't know their story, in short, it was just about a year ago, actually, that Jason and I first sat down and started praying through kind of what I saw and what he saw and what others saw, and he accepted his call to ministry. Now, Jason is at Pacific Evangelical School of Ministry. He's a freshman, so he has 3 years left, but he will graduate with his Master of Ministry degree as well. Likely not as good of grades as me, but he'll graduate, and I'll help him get through it. But we are just so blessed by the staff here at our church, and I want you to know that your kids are in, your youth are in phenomenal hands. They do an excellent job, and I will tell you that with 11 years of youth ministry, I did a lot of things really well. I did a few things excellent, but one of the areas that Jason and Krista excel at, that I appreciate so much about them, is their ability to build relationships and genuinely care for each youth. They care deeply and have concern for these youth. They have them at their home. They do life and they do ministry with these youth, and that is something to be admired. That is phenomenal. So just want to praise God for having an incredible staff like that. We are finishing up today our series entitled No Perfect People Allowed. We have been looking at kind of what God can do through brokenness. And the first week was Easter Sunday. We kicked things off and we looked at the resurrection, but we kind of focused a little bit on Mary Magdalene and how Jesus used her in spite of her brokenness. If you remember, Mary was demon possessed. She had 7 demons actually at one point, and they liken her to the prostitute or the simple woman who would have anointed Jesus' feet, and yet Jesus chose her and her brokenness to do ministry. The second week we looked at the Apostle Paul. And we looked at him before he was the Apostle Paul. Actually, when he was Saul, he was a Pharisee, and how he had set out to create a genocide for followers of the way. And that was his whole sole purpose, was to kill and condemn Christians, and how God had an incredible encounter with him and transformed his life, and how Saul became Paul, an apostle who was a spokesman for God and really the father of the early church, and did just so many incredible things. Then last week, we followed things up and really kind of looked at how God works in spite of our brokenness, and where our heads are at, where our hearts are at, and kind of what our priorities need to be. And we look at how we want to be perfect according to the things of this world, and we want to be perfect at work, and we want to be perfect in our sports, and perfect in our extracurricular activities, and perfect in our family. And yet there's really only one perfect priority in this world, and that is Jesus Christ. And we talked about the bike wheel and how you have an axle in the middle and everything else are spokes. That Jesus needs to be our axle in the middle, and that everything else, the spokes, are the other things in life. But as long as Jesus is the center of it all, he's our perfect priority. As I was thinking about today, I remember a story about a young guy who was full of energy, a lot like me, had a lot of ambitious goals and dreams, set out in life to accomplish a lot of things, and had quickly built a lot of relationships, and had climbed the corporate ladder pretty quickly, and at a young age was on track to accomplish all the goals that he had set out. The guy was highly influential in his spheres of influence. He was influential in the marketplace or the business world. He was doing great things in relationships with people. And he had everything going for him. It looked like it couldn't get any better. He had bad days just like you and I have bad days, but in all, it seemed like he had it all put together. He was the perfect package. He was whole, he was complete. Things were going exceptionally well for him. Then life started hitting him from all sides, and he began to make various choices that affected him negatively. And others around him began to make choices that affected his life negatively, or the circumstances surrounding his life. And then the things of this world started stacking up against him, and he started making poor choices. He started turning to various alternative means to fill this gap, this void in his life. One day he decided to get out and just get alone. Collect his thoughts. I think that's a good thing to do, to meditate, to get alone, to just to be alone with your thoughts, and to process kind of where you're at and what's going on and what's going on. In fact, I'm a big advocate of journaling. So this young man who had done so many great things and had done it so well, and people had praised him and had admired him, were now admonishing him, and were correcting him, and were getting after him. So this young man decided to climb up a city wall, and as he was sitting on a wall, he overlooked the entire city, the hills, the valleys, the trees, the buildings, the people, the passerbys. And he sat there reflecting on the things of his life, reflecting on all the things that had gone right up to that point, and then trying to figure out, trying to process in his mind, what was it? What was that one thing? What was the moment in which things turned around negatively? That he began to experience negative things, or began to experience negative self-talk, or began to turn to alternative means to fill a void in his life. You know what those alternative means are? Sex, drugs, pornography, alcoholism, workaholism, those types of things. And he looked at it and he began to just internally beat himself up for all of the negative things he had done in his life. It was in that moment that he was so overwhelmed with emotion and so taken by the things that he had done in this world that were all screwed up. He was getting frustrated and he was trying to readjust his position on the wall, and as he was going to readjust his position, he lost his footing, his foot slipped, and his hand slipped and he fell face first and he hit the ground. Broken and battered, he lay there. The people who saw came quickly and they began to try to help this young man. They began to try to stabilize him and make sure he was okay, and the officials in the area, the cops and the EMT, they came and they tried to stabilize this young man, but despite all the efforts of those in this world, there was nothing they could do to put this guy's life back together. There was nothing that they could do to physically put this guy's life back together or emotionally piece this man's life back together. Because their resources are only so much. They're limited in what they can offer this guy. And so there he is, barely hanging on by a thread to life, broken, battered, and wondering what now, because his life can't be put back together. So he's of no use to anybody anymore. Physically, he won't be of use to anybody. He'll probably be, if he lives, a quadriplegic or at best a paraplegic. Emotionally, if he lives, he'll be a wreck for everybody, because if people only knew the things he had done, or the things that he had said, or the places he had been, or the people that he had hurt, or the damage that he had created, well, they wouldn't want to have anything to do with him. And so he lay there wishing death upon himself. Anybody recognize this story? It's actually a nursery rhyme. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again. It's something that we learn at such a young age, and yet we entirely miss the point, the big picture. We move on to Little Miss Muffet and don't focus on Humpty Dumpty. Yet how many of you in your lives have ever been or have ever felt like Humpty Dumpty? Good intentions, great goals, ambitious things ahead of you, but because of a few choices in your life, because of a few choices of others around you, or because of the pressures and the things of this world, you fell. And upon falling, you felt broken. You were internally broken, you were physically broken, you were emotionally broken, you were spiritually broken, and you were at that place where you were down and you were destitute, and there was nothing, I mean absolutely nothing, that anybody can do to put you back together again. Growing up, I was a huge wrestling fan. Now, you guys who know me know that I did wrestle in junior high, high school, and college, but I was also another kind of wrestling fan. WWF and WCW. The smart guys like Michael and I, we like that stuff because it's real. There was a guy that was a wrestler. He was an Italian guy, had this big, huge, broad chest. It was hairy, and he wore this leather kind of vest, and he walked around. He had this one curl in the front of his hair, and he had a mullet, and he always chewed a toothpick, and he walked in, and his name was Razor Ramon. And he would walk out, and he would take the toothpick, and he would flick it in your face. His real name is Scott Hall. And the other night I was trying to go to sleep and my mind was just flooded with thoughts. And so as I'm laying in bed, I turn on ESPN. And they're doing kind of a 30 for 30, which is where they document somebody's life. And they did a documentary on Scott Hall. This is a guy who had good intentions, who had the best of ideas in mind and was successful by the world standards. The guy was a millionaire in his 20s. He was strong, he was athletic, he was good looking, he was successful as a wrestler, had a lot going for him. Now, 51 years old, he's been in and out of rehab for drugs and alcohol abuse almost 20 times. He's lost his marriage, he's lost his children, and now he's losing his health because of all of the abuse that he did to his body. And in this documentary, I sat there and watched a guy who used to be bigger than life, broken, beyond repair. Or at least that's how he taught. Guys, there is an enemy. The Bible says that our battle is not against flesh and blood. Our battle is against the enemy, the evil one, the dark forces of this world, the principalities. And what the enemy would love nothing more to do this morning is to get into your head and to tell you that what I'm about to share with you is unattainable. And what's going to happen likely is as I share with you this morning, things are going to start coming to your mind, things that you've done in the past that, well, you just really screwed things up for yourself and for others. The broken relationships that you've had, the alcoholism, the amount of sexual partners you've had, the drugs, the violence, the broken family, the lying, the cheating, the extramarital affair, the stealing. Those things are likely going to start creeping into your head this morning. And what's going to happen is I think the enemy is going to try to distract you and stop you from hearing God's plan and purpose for your life. You see, in order to come to church and in order to come to Christ, he's not looking for perfect people. He's looking for what kind of people? Willing people. People who are willing to come just as they are and say, all that I am and all that I have, all of my baggage, all of my brokenness, it's yours, God. You see, I think it's when we're at the bottom of the wall and we're broken and we're battered and all the king's horses and all the king's men, the things of this world, they can't figure out how to put us back together again, and we learn to rely solely on God, that God can use us most, that God can mold us most, that he can make us most. And so I pray right now in Jesus' name against the distractions and against the lies of the enemy who are going to try to come into your head this morning and into your heart and get a hold of your emotions and tell you you're not good enough or you're too broken or the world, if only they knew what you had done, they would want nothing to do with you, and that church people wouldn't accept you. That's garbage. That is garbage. Grab your Bibles. Turn to Exodus chapter 3. If you're new to the faith and you're new to church and you don't have a Bible, I want to give you one. I want to be able to give you a gift of a Bible. So come find me after church and say, hey, Andrew, I need a Bible. Can you give me one? And I'll hook you up. If you do have your Bibles or your iPads or your phones, Exodus is the second book of the Bible in the Old Testament. There's a guy that we're going to study today. Much like ourselves, broken and battered. You see, the stories of a young kid who was born in a very tumultuous time in his country's history and heritage. At one time, the Israelites were a powerful, powerful people. But because of choices and rulers, the Egyptians and the Israelites had come together at one point where Joseph had served Pharaoh. And Joseph was second in command of over all the kingdom. But over time, the changing of the guard took place, and Joseph became less and less of an instrumental figure, and Pharaoh became less and less of honoring Joseph's God, and in fact moved away to plural gods, little g gods, had multiple gods, including himself. He felt that he himself was a god. And as the Israelites began to grow in numbers, the Egyptians feared that there would be an overthrowing of the throne. And so what they had done is they had captivated and they had turned the Israelites into work slaves or work prisoners. And they were growing at such a fast rate. Now, I don't know what it was that was causing the amazing growth in their lives. Maybe it was that the Israelite women were smoking hot. And the guys couldn't keep their hands off of them. I don't know. I just know that there were so many babies being born that the Pharaoh sent out an edict or a command across the country, these two countries, Egypt and over in Israel, sent out this command that said, any new baby that's born, dead. Any new baby boy, gone. Done with them, out. So they're spreading like rabbits. There's kids coming out everywhere, and they're killing babies left and right. There's this little boy whose mom is so anxious, and she tries to hide this little boy, and she tries to keep him quiet and comfort him, but she gets to the place where she can no longer do that, and so she takes him and she makes a basket of reeds in Egypt, and she sets him in the Nile River. Now, the Nile River is kind of like an aqueduct, and it runs together. There's multiple kind of tributaries at the end of it that run into an ocean. But the Nile River ran north and south, or runs north and south. And so you get this picture of this young mother holding their child. Now, if any of you in here have children or have ever experienced somebody who does, you know that there's nothing more intimate in this world than the bond between a mother and their child. When they're holding that child whom they gave birth to. So I just want you to imagine just for a minute the gut-wrenching experience this must have been for this young mother to have put Moses into a basket and set him into the Nile River and send him upstream. This little boy ends up at the palace. Pharaoh's daughter is bathing with her assistants, and one of the assistants hears the baby, and they bring the baby to Pharaoh's daughter, and she keeps him as her own. She cares for him as though she were one of her own. And so this young man, Moses, grows up in the kingdom palace. He grows up royalty. He grows up having not want. Does that make sense? He wanted for nothing. He had royal gowns and he had royal jewelry, and he would have received an Ivy League education, and people would have admired him, and they would have bowed down and they would have worshiped him, and he would have been second in command behind Pharaoh and his brother. But yet, deep inside, he knew that something was missing. There was a part of him that didn't belong there. And so Moses one day was walking out along the palace, and he saw his own people, the Hebrew people, and these Jews were being beaten and battered by the Egyptians. And Moses, he just reacted. How many of you in here are reactionary kind of people? And after you do something, you're like, oh, geez, what was I thinking? I'm one of those. I'm one of those guys who reacts, and then later I'm like, that was kind of stupid. There's a point in my life where I was that guy who, if you cut me off in the road, in fact, I'll tell you a quick story. I was a pastor in North Carolina, and Stacy and I had been married, 6 years by then. We had 3 kids. We had Autumn, who was not even a teenager yet. Caden, who was maybe 2, and Talon, who had just been born. I just got done giving one of the best messages I think I've ever given. Not that I grade them, but I'm kind of hard on myself. And God had just done some really cool things. And I had this full-size Chevy truck. And then I got smart and I bought a Dodge recently. So just saying. So I had this full-size Chevy truck, and there was this county road that was kind of like another highway, and it was a 2-lane highway, but in order to get from our church, you had to kind of go over the train tracks and onto this road. I pulled out, and I had at least a mile clearance from the next car behind me, which was a BMW. And I'm driving, and this guy comes up and gets beside me, and he flips me off, and then he pulls in front of me, slams on his brakes. And Stacy looks at me and wants to see how I'm going to react. And in the moment, it was Sunday. I was dressed in nice clothes. I had khakis on and a button-down shirt, and I had just preached. I'm just going to let the guy go. So I did what any God-fearing Christian would do, and I let him go. I said, oh, it's no big deal, Stacy. He's just an idiot. So he goes on, and we go a couple of miles to where we're about to exit over the Neuse River and getting ready to take our exit to go home. And all of a sudden, there's this 4-lane, it moves from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, and I'm in the far 4th lane. This BMW is probably 4 or 5 cars ahead of me, slams on his brakes and cuts across 4 lanes of traffic to get in front of me, slams on his brakes again to the point where my truck locks up all 4 tires, and I'm going, and I'm off into a ditch. And then he takes off. So I did what any God-fearing man would do, what any God-fearing husband would do, and pastor. I put my truck in low, and I chased this fool down. I'm talking all 5.2 liters of my engine just, I'm just going on, I'm just hauling. And I roll my window down, and then I lock it so Stacy can't roll it up. And she's sitting across. This guy has his window down. God help him. And I am leaning over Stacy while holding the steering wheel, and I am saying every expletive you can imagine. I'll kill you if you pull over. Come on, you son of a... I'm going nuts at him. He literally, I kid you not, you ask Stacy, he shrinks in his seat. He's a small guy. He's a small dude. He's maybe 5'7", 5'8", and weighs $150. You can tell by this scrawny little neck. Oh, and I wanted to get a hold of that neck too. At this point, I'm 6'2", 313 pounds, and I just was gonna... So, I'm going off on this guy. He won't even look at me. And Stacy's sobbing. My kids are sobbing. Caden, who can barely talk, is telling me to stop it, Daddy, stop. Normally it's go faster, Daddy. Now it's stop it, Daddy. And I pulled off to the side of the road, and I inched my way up to the next exit, and I pulled off into a Walmart parking lot. And I looked down, and I realized I had all my fishing knives with me, my fillet knife, and I had a club that I could knock fish out with. And realized that if I had been pulled over, those are considered weapons, and that now becomes a felony. Road rage is a huge deal. This guy could have had a gun. I mean, any number of things. And so I sat there, and I just started sobbing, and I begged my wife and kids for forgiveness and realized I had an anger problem. And I should probably look into some counseling. So I've been in anger management counseling off and on for the last 5 years. Recently, I was talking to my counselor about some anger stuff and fighting. And in the counseling session, I was calm when I got there. By the time I left, I was ready to fight. I was just explaining. He asked me, what do you like about fighting? And give me an example. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm going, just want to take on this, and there's just something, and my counselor looks at me and goes, we're making progress. I'll show you progress, pal. I don't need to get paid to get all ticked off, man. I just go home for that crap. Are you kidding me? No, I didn't mean like because of my wife or anything. I meant like I get mad at the dog. I get mad at whatever. Don't make something out of it. You guys are always doing that. I go home. I get done from preaching, and I go home, and Stacy, who's not in here this morning, you're going to go say something to her. This has nothing to do with Stacy. Shame on all of you. Shame on you. Father, forgive. See, this is where it would help just to preach from notes. Jeez. Moses was a reactionary kind of guy, my kind of guy. He's out in the palace, and he sees one of his fellow people being abused by one of the Egyptians, and he goes out and he shoves the guy over a bridge, and the dude dies. And you'd think that the Israelite would be grateful to Moses. And Moses says, hey, come with me. And he says, no, what are you going to do, kill me next? So Moses becomes an exile in his own country, countries plural. He's no longer wanted by the Egyptians. In fact, he's feared for his life, and he's no longer wanted by the Israelites. So he goes into the desert, and he ends up finding a wife there, and he works for his father-in-law Jethro, and he goes from the palace gates to a shepherd boy. He goes from having multiple servants to scoop and poop. And that's where we pick it up. Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. Now Moses was tending flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. So his father-in-law was a wealthy man. He was an intelligent man. He had followers who would have listened to him and listened to his instruction. And Moses had married his daughter and had begun to work for him as a shepherd. And he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now, the mountain of God, or the mountain of Horeb, is actually, another word for that is Mount Sinai. Anybody who comes to Ignite or came last week would have seen a map that we talked through. Mount Sinai is down on near the peninsula. You got the Nile River next to it. You've got Egypt, and you've got the Gulf of Suez, which most of you probably recognize or at least have heard of it. Well, that is kind of that's where Mount Sinai is. It's right in between the Gulf of Aqaba and the Gulf of Suez, nearest Egypt. So he's on this mountain, and what makes it a mountain of God, at this point, this is kind of a precursor for what's about to happen. The reason that it's a mountain of God is because where God is becomes holy. We're going to talk about that in a minute. The things that God does becomes a holy place. And so this is a holy mountain, not in this moment, but because when God shows up, it becomes holy. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Now, Something that you women should know about guys, we're all pyromaniacs. No, we love fire. There's something about it from an early age. My son is 8, and we get ready to go. He turns into like Beavis and Butthead whenever I go to do a fire. He's like, yeah, I want fire, Dad. Yeah, light a fire. I want to light it, Dad. Yeah. Come back, and he's got no eyebrows, and that was cool, Dad. I'm the kind of guy who, when you light a fire, I want the lighting fluid. I'm like, just got to learn your lesson to stop at a certain point because it comes back. Oh, you laugh. I wasn't. Moses goes up in the side of this mountain, of Mount Sinai, near Horeb, and he walks into this cavern, and in this cavern there's this bush, and this bush is on fire. Who wouldn't stop to check that out? In fact, we call it rubbernecking, don't we? Or chicken necking. Going down a freeway and you see an accident, you're like, oh, wow, that sucks to be them. Instead of saying that sucks to be them, I want to encourage you to start praying for them. Or you see a fire and you're like, ooh, smoke. And you want to know where that fire comes from. In fact, my youth pastor in Oregon, a really good buddy of mine and his wife, they have a police scanner application on their iPhone. And what they do for date nights is they chase down fire trucks and police cars. I mean, to each their own, right? So, Moses sees this fire, and it's an angel of the Lord who appears to him. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it didn't burn up. It's one thing to be on fire. It's something entirely different to be on fire, yet not burning up. That would catch my attention. If I were to sit here right now and light this platform and this column on fire, but it didn't burn up, I would be curious about it. And I'm not one of those scientific minds. I really don't care that much about that stuff. But I would know that something was up with that. Because wood is supposed to burn. And so, it perked Moses' attention. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it didn't burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight. Why the bush doesn't burn up. Makes sense. When the Lord, now the word Lord there is Yahweh, it's covenant keeper. Before that, the word God is Elohim, or God creator. The Lord, Yahweh, saw that he had gone over to look, and God, Elohim, called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. All right, so let me get this right. We got a burning bush. It's not burning up, and now the bush is talking to me. At that point, I'm rubbing my eyes, I'm checking my ears, and I'm going to go think about seeing a psych. You got a burning bush talking to you. The bush says, do not come any closer. And God said, take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. Again, I tell you, what makes this ground holy isn't the fact that it's Mount Sinai, isn't the fact that it's got a bush in this cavern. It's the fact that God is there, and where God is holy. People get fixated on the church, the building, the stained glass, the pews, their seats. Yeah, I said their seats. Don't make the mistake of sitting in somebody else's seat, church. Oh, God knows you'll pay for it. Woo! They pledged $50 and got a little plaque on the side of it. That's their seat. The pews. People get it twisted. There's absolutely nothing holy about a church building. It is bricks, it is mortar, and it is debt to the bank. The church, the ecclesia, is a body, a gathering of people who come together to honor God, glorify God, learn about God, praise God, worship God, help one another, love one another. That is the church. So often people focus on the religious side of things, and it's about the building and about the activities. It's not. That doesn't make you holy. That makes you active. What makes you holy is a right relationship with God. And so, if your home is got God dwelling in it, it's a holy place, and treat it as such. Then he said, I am the God, the Elohim, the creator of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He's giving testimony to who he is. He's talking about the authority, what gives him the authority to preach, what gives him the authority to speak, what gives him the authority to tell, to give him instruction. I am God, creator. I made Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. I created the heavens and the earth. You know about me. You've heard about me from your ancestors. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Because he was broken. Much like Adam and Eve in the garden, when their sin got in the way of their right relationship with God and they hid themselves from God. They covered up their nakedness for fear that God would see them. Moses was hiding his face. How many of us, when we come to God covering our face because we don't want God to see us in all of our grossness, and all of our yuckiness, and all of our brokenness? Yeah, listen to God's response. The Lord said, I've indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt, and I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites and Hittites and Amorites and Perizzites and Hivites and the Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. This is Elohim, God, and this is also Yahweh, God. Yahweh is covenant keeper. He made a covenant with Abraham that he would make his descendants as many as the stars in the sky. And he's honoring his covenant to his people. And he's saying, I want you to be the conduit, Moses, that I'm going to use to draw my people, God's chosen people, out of the oppression and the slavery and the brokenness of the hand of the Egyptians. If somebody were to tell you today that you're going to experience a burning bush this afternoon, it's going to talk to you and tell you what to do, but it's not going to burn up, then it's God. What would your response to that bush be? Let's listen to Moses' response. Probably similar to ours. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Today we're going to look briefly at 4 excuses that keep us from pursuing the plan and the purposes God has in our life. 4 excuses that keep us from the things of God in our lives. The first is this. We find no value in ourselves. We don't feel valuable. Moses considers what God is asking him to do, and then he looks at his life and he says, who am I? I find no value in my life. If you only knew what I had done and been where I've been and have seen what I've seen and said what I've said and thought what I've thought, you would know that I have no value to you, God. I can't be used by you, God. And God's response to Moses is unbelievable. He said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on a mountain. Moses said, I have no value. Let me explain this to you. God gave his one and only son to die in your place for your sins and for your salvation. God places a pretty high value on your life. I have 4 children and 1 on the way. I love each one of my children. I love you. If I can be honest, I love my children a little bit more. I would have a hard time sacrificing or killing any one of my kids for you. Not because I don't love you, but because I love them just a little bit more. Because I'm carnal and I'm human. If I were in a position where I had to sacrifice one of my offspring for you, and I gave them up to die, and then you came to me and I said to you, my child has died in your place, now I need you to do this because of this. And you said to me, I have no value. You can't use me. I have no value. I would likely grab you by the collar and punch you square in your beak. I'm going to need some more anger management after I'm done with you. You mean to tell me that my child has no value in your life because I gave him up to die for you and you're not willing to do a small thing for me? That's what this is like going to God. God says, Moses, I'm going to give my child for you. I'm going to give my child for your people. I love you so much, I'm going to sacrifice everything for you. And you have value. I care about you. I know you by name. I know the number of hairs on your head. I have seen the oppression of my people. I have heard their cries, and I'm going to honor my commitment to them. And then you come to God and say, well, I can't do it. I've got no value. God, if only you knew the crap that I had done. Do you know how many times I've heard people say to me, Andrew, I feel called to ministry, but if people only knew what I had done, I would never have a place in ministry. I will never forget the place or the time when I was sitting there talking to my best friend from high school and his wife when she found out that I had become a youth pastor, and she called me up on the phone. We were talking, we were that close, we were all joking, and she started laughing. She goes, yeah, right. I know who you really are. You could never be a pastor. Lies of the enemy. One of the excuses that keeps us from doing the things that God has called us to do is we find no value in our lives. We feel like what we have to offer just isn't valuable because of how messed up and broken we are. It's more comfortable to stay on the ground, broken and in pieces, than it is to rise up to the occasion and allow God to use us in light of our brokenness and in spite of ourselves. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what should I say to them? God says to Moses, I am who I am. I don't need no stinking badge. I'm God. I'm Elohim. I'm the covenant keeper. I'm God, creator. I created the heavens and the earth. I created the very ground that they're walking on. Tell them that I am sent you. Oh, sure thing, God, no problem. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord your God of fathers, the God of Abraham and Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I can be remembered from generation to generation, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I am who I am. I am God. And then he goes on to give him several instructions. Go assemble the leaders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob appeared to me and said, I've watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have promised to bring you up out of misery in Egypt and into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the covenant keeper, and I will honor my word. God cannot lie to us. God cannot lie to us. His word cannot lie to us. And he honors his word. The elders of Israel will listen to you. And then the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the desert to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. What he's saying is, when you come to a place of intimate knowledge of God, your next response is worship. When God, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, comes to the Hebrew people, their response is to travel for 3 days and to make sacrifices and worship God. When you come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ and you have a right relationship with him, you can no longer go live as the rest of the world lives or live in your brokenness anymore. Your one response is to worship God. The world wants to know why you call yourself a Christian when you walk around paralyzed with emotion, why you walk around broken and sad all the time, when you're depressed all the time and you complain about your job and you complain about your money and you complain about your relationships, and they sit there and say, well, geez, I don't even have to be a Christian to act like that. The Bible says, rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. So why are we paralyzed with brokenness? Why do we choose to live in our brokenness? Just like last week, I said we choose to live in this mess of broken priorities. Why then would anybody choose to live in paralysis of this broken world when we have the freedom to go and worship God in light of our circumstances and in spite of ourselves? We are called to worship. Are you a true worshiper this morning? Or are you so consumed with the brokenness of your circumstances that you can't worship? Or you choose not to? And I will make the Egyptians, verse 21, favorably disposed toward this people, so that you will leave and will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor, and any woman living in her house, for articles of silver and gold and for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters, and you will plunder the Egyptians. I'm going to take care of your needs, is what he's saying. I'm going to provide for you. Moses, you may not think you're valuable, but I will be with you. The next excuse that Moses has, Moses answered, well, what if they don't believe me or listen to me or do what I say? And they say, the Lord did not appear to you. Moses says, I'm not acceptable. The people won't accept me. I killed one of my own. I killed one of my own Egyptian brothers, and my Hebrew brothers they can't stand me because I was part of the oppression for so long. What if they don't accept me? I can't honor you, God, because I won't be accepted. If only people know what I've done, they won't accept me. And you know what? Unfortunately, that is so true in Christian circles. That is so true in Christian circles. Back in the 60s and 70s, if you were divorced, you couldn't serve in the church. If you had a kid out of wedlock, you couldn't serve in the church. If you were broken in any way, you couldn't serve in the church. Yet when I read the Bible, it says that Jesus came for the sick and not the healthy. It says it's the sick who need a doctor, not the healthy. So all you pretentious believers going around pretending that you have it all put together, I've got no use for you. But those of you who call yourselves Christians this morning and recognize your brokenness, God will use you, and he will restore you, and he will build his kingdom on you, and God will do great things in and through you in spite of you. Just don't wear a facade. Don't pretend to be something you're not. Call it what it is. It's sin, and it separates you from God. It's brokenness, and it separates you from God, but he can and he will restore you. It doesn't matter about the king's horses and the king's men. They got nothing to offer us, but the God creator and the God covenant keeper can restore you. And he accepts you as you are. Listen to me, church. He accepts you right as you are, but he loves you so much that he's not going to leave you that way. I don't know all your stories. I don't know your junk. I don't know your baggage. I know you're not perfect. I know you got habits and hiccups and hang-ups and past and stories. And I know the world loves to throw that in your face. And I know the Christian church loves to throw that. Well, geez, they couldn't be a leader. They've been divorced. He couldn't be a leader. Do you know? He was in a gang. He was a high school dropout. He had a kid when he was 16. God could never use somebody like that. We feel not accepted, and that's not a very comfortable feeling. Think about a time in your life where you weren't accepted for some reason. For me, when I was 13 years old, I'll never forget the feeling. I grew up dirt poor. I'm talking government cheese, powdered milk, dirt poor, Section 8 housing, living from house to house. And I'll never forget, I had poor hygiene as a kid. I was overweight, and I'll never forget riding the bus home one day, and I had the worst dandruff in the world. And the kids behind me started calling me Snowflake. Oh, I wanted to kill him. It doesn't feel good to not to be accepted, does it? Because of our nationality, or because of our history, or because of something we've done. God accepts you as you are. And then he loves you so much that he doesn't leave you that way. So forget the second excuse. The Lord said to him, what is in your hand? And Moses said, it's a staff. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. And Moses threw this staff, this tool that was used to poke and prod sheep and that was used to fend off predators for these sheep. He took this tool and he threw it to the ground, this staff. And when he threw it to the ground, it became a snake. I've got two fears in this world, two significant fears, heights and snakes. If you really want to get me, take me up to a mountain and throw a snake at me. It's not a little fear. I'm talking legitimate fear. Where my son, who's 8, would catch these gardener snakes and would tease me with them. I'm like, boy, you put that snake down, I'm going to kill you. Wait till I get my hands on you. He's afraid. He ran from it. Verse 4, then the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. You do it, God. I'm not doing it. I'm not going to grab a serpent. I'm not going to grab a poisonous snake. But he listened. So Moses reached out and he took hold of the snake and he turned it into a staff. That's pretty cool. I don't care who you are. Houdini couldn't even pull that off. So Moses, after that, took hold of it and it became a staff in his hand. Verse 5, this, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord of God of your fathers, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. Then the Lord said, put your hand into your cloak. And so Moses, he puts his hand to his cloak and he pulls it out and it becomes leprous. And leprous were unacceptable people. They were considered unclean. In fact, if you had leprosy, you had your own colony you had to go live. You were cast out. You had your own colony that you would go live on, because you were so unclean and you were so highly contagious. So Moses pulls his hand out and he's got leprosy and he realizes yet again, I'm not going to be accepted by anybody. I'm going to have to go live as an outcast which I've already been doing. I've been living in exile, so he puts his hand back in and God heals his hand again. Listen to this third excuse though. Verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, "Oh Lord, I know you want me to go, and I know you want me to tell Pharaoh and the Egyptians to let your people go and that you have a plan for their lives, but I've never been eloquent in speech, neither in the past nor have I spoken to your servant. I am slow to speech and tongue, and I don't make light of anybody who has a speech impediment because I have a slight lisp." If you ever listen to me when I'm nervous or frustrated, I have a slight lisp when I use my S's specifically. My daughter Taylin, who's 6, was in speech therapy for 2 years. My son Caden, who's 8, had to literally be an interpreter for us. We would be talking to her and she would be desperately trying to say something to us, and finally we'd have to say, "Pally, what is she saying?" He'd say, "Taylin, say it again," and she'd say, "Ha-ha-ha-ha," and he'd say, "Oh, she wants another bite of macaroni and cheese." I'm like, of course she does. The third excuse that Moses throws out is, "I don't have the skill set that it requires to serve you, God. I don't have the skills to serve you. I'm not an eloquent speaker. I'm slow in speech. I don't have what it takes, God. What do you want me to do?" How many of us feel that way? You have nothing to offer God. You have no skills to offer God. Because of your brokenness, your hurt, your pain, your patterns, all those things, you have nothing you have to offer God. You just have no skills you can offer God. Look at me, in my eyes. That is a lie. That is a lie straight from the pits of hell. God has equipped you, he's gifted you, he's called you, and he has a plan for your life. Just like when Moses said, "Well, they're not going to accept me," God said, "I have a plan and a purpose for your life." Here he's saying, "I don't have any skills," and God says, "I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you utilize what you do have to make a difference in the lives of others." If you would just be obedient to God's call in your life, if you would accept his call in your life, he will utilize your brokenness, your pain, your hurt, and what skills you do have. And if you don't have them, guess what? He's a pretty generous God. He'll give you some. I don't know where I got the gift to speak, let alone not speak without notes. I don't brag about it. I'm proud of it because I think it's pretty cool. But listen, this came from God. I didn't grow up learning how to speak. I grew up speaking Ebonics in the inner city streets of Portland. I didn't take any speech classes until I got to college, and even then, I didn't really study. I just went up and made stuff up. I almost said crap. Made stuff up, made crap up. And I still got good grades, but listen, God took this gift, this one gift that I have, and he turned it in for something positive for his kingdom. Don't look at what you don't have. Focus on what you do have, which is a God who is a great big God, and he can equip you and help you and get you to a place where you can use it, and he will help you. You're not alone in this journey. God says, "I'm going to go with you, Moses. I'm going to accompany you on your journey. I'm going to serve you." So when you go to work tomorrow, God's going with you, Carrie Guerrero. When you go to work tomorrow, he's going with you, Michael. When you go to school tomorrow, Leah, he's going with you. You don't have to do this on your own. Lindsay, you don't have to do this on your own. Dave, none of you guys. God is with you. You don't have to live out this call on your own. You don't have to worry about whether people are going to find value in you, or they're going to accept you for who you are or what you've done, or whether they're going to think you have skills. God wants to use you. He's got a plan and purpose for your life, and he's going to go with you. The last excuse that we need to get rid of, last but not least, Moses says after all this in verse 13, "Oh Lord, please send somebody else to do it." God, I don't have any value. I'm not accepted. I don't have any skills, and I'm not sure of myself. I don't feel sound in myself. I'm not sure of myself. God, you've got to send somebody